Hey guys, Gramble here. I'm back again with another video on my favorite topic. Can you guess what that is? With the season finally wrapped up, it's time for my yearly retrospective. Every year I like to do some sort of ranking to the seasons. Season 7 I did, well, a ranking video, which was surely something, alright. And season 8 I did a live stream where I ranked the entirety of the season. So for this year I'm going to be doing something a little different. It's a ranking video like season 7, but it also combines the tier list aspect of season 8. I'm just going to go through each episode in order and just give my general ranking and my thoughts on it. For this I'll mostly be covering the fights, but I will be talking about the analysis since, you know, they're 75% of the episode. That sound good? So with those in place, let's begin. Jinx versus Harley. Gonna be honest with you, this is a pretty alright season opener. It's definitely not the best opener, but at least it sets the quality for the rest of the season. Unlike with season 8, where Yoda vs. Mickey was absolutely astounding, and then most of the season itself was just mediocrity. Jinx vs. Harley as an episode is very polarizing to me. On one hand, the fight is pretty solid, but on the other hand, that analysis is just complete garbo. Jinx vs. Harley is a very fun fight, and is one of the most polished 3D episodes of the season. Granted, it's because they had 3 months to work on the episode, but their effort is definitely shown here, as this is probably one of the best looking 3D episodes we have gotten since the Source Filmmaker and Blender team have taken over. I'm not a fan of the Harley model just because I don't like reboot Harley Quinn, and it's very weird to see this model paired up with Jinx's, which is looking a little weird. It kind of looks a bit outdated compared to Harley, but it's not that big of a deal to me because everything else about the fight is pretty much positive. The fight choreography is very well done, and I actually really like that they use different gadgets for them rather than just having, you know, Harley swing her hammer around. These two have a lot of things they could throw at each other, and they use that to their advantage. Because as I said in the past, Source Filmmaker / Blender is much better worked with, not hand-to-hand fighting wise, as we'll see later. This also really allows for a lot of fun segments in it. I like the carousel scene, which is very goofy and charming. The control panel scene where they just go through different dimensions is very fun. Nice little Easter eggs too to other death battles. And then you have the climax of the fight with the Nerf gas house party, which is a very well done stylistic scene, which is a nice callback to that of Arcane. And while I'm not a fan of brand new vocal tracks, I actually do like this one quite a bit, even though it's sung by a VTuber. So overall, the fight is pretty good. So what makes me not like this episode, or what do I dislike about it? Everything else. Honestly, I think the analysis to these episodes is complete garbage. It doesn't really cover anything interesting to either character. And the big thing for me about this episode is that I just don't care about the idea. I don't like modern Harley Quinn, and I do not like League of Legends at all. So realistically, I can't say I care about this episode that much. But like I said, it's a good starter to the season because it sets a standard for it. Unlike with season 8, where Yoda vs. Mickey overhyped the hell out of it, and that led to a downward spiral and a complete hit or miss with most of that season. I still don't care for this episode though. Your Honor, League of Legends, C tier. Scarlet Witch versus Zatanna. Should probably be calling this episode Zatanna versus Scarlet Witch, am I right, boys? but no, seriously, this episode is really fucking boring. The only positives I can really say about this episode is that Zatanna's in it, because realistically, Zatanna just hard carries this episode. Basically, any cool power used in this episode is because of Zatanna. Because unlike Zatanna, Scarlet Witch doesn't have a personality to her, which really doesn't make the fight super interesting to watch in most cases. There are some cool moments to it, but I wouldn't say it's worth watching over and over again because of that. Granted, I would watch it for other reasons, if you know what I mean. Also, the death is fucking lame. I get the idea behind it, but it was so boring. There's really nothing to this episode other than watching it because, horny. So, yeah, D tier. Jonathan versus Tanjiro. Now we're starting to get into the really good episodes, because this episode is absolutely fantastic. Firstly, the fight itself is great. I love the banter between these two characters because it's very well written, and if you couldn't tell, Liam knows how to write his JoJo characters. My favorite being the funny does he know meme. The question still remains, does he know? And despite them using custom models, I really like the sprite rigging in this episode. It's not all perfect, but I do think it looks a lot better in most cases in this fight than other episodes in general. I like when Jonathan loses pluck, so he has to use a tree as a sword. The X-ray scenes with Tanjiro where we see Jonathan's lungs breathing as Hamon flows through him is really cool. This fight does a really good job balancing sword to sword and fist to fist with Jonathan's Hamon abilities and Tanjiro's breathing techniques. Though this does lead into my biggest gripes with the episode. The effects look pretty cheap when Tanjiro does something. I get they're just doing what the anime did, but it does not look well animated at all. Which is very weird because Joseph's Hamon looks pretty good, and I think that when the fire style is used when he gets stabbed through the chest also looks pretty decent as well. It's just early on in the fight, the effects look really cheaply done and almost slapped on last second. Another thing is that I think the death, while it does seem decently in character, is kinda cringe. Like, it's supposed to be this heartbreaking moment, but it's done in the most goofiest, tone backward shit I've ever seen. Ah yes, do not worry, random stranger. I will take care of your sister, even though I'm the reason why you have a caved in skull right now. And the last thing for animation wise, in terms of issues, is that the camera can sometimes be a bit jank. It can be very disorienting in certain shots as to what is going on. However though, I don't see it as much of a big deal. However though, it's still there and it's worth pointing out. And the last thing I have issues with is Tanjiro's analysis. I understand they don't want to delve into spoilers, but the way they do their analysis, aka analyzing them as characters and not just, stat bricks, it basically fucks them over in the long run. Because if you can't talk about a character's story because of spoiler reasons, you hinder that analysis for that character. It's also weird to me that they want to cut back on spoilers, because with Dio versus Alucard, they did not care about Part 6 spoilers, even though Part 6's second part of the anime did not come out until, as of this recording, actually. So for that reason, I'm going to stick this matchup in A tier. Thor versus Vegeta. This episode's raw as fuck, and it's the best Dragon Ball episode of the season. I would definitely say it's not the best Thor episode, because Thor versus Raiden, but I would definitely say this is the best Vegeta episode, even though he only had one other episode, which was 10 years ago now. But this is the present, and oh boy, does the present have a lot of fun goodies in it. Just like Thor versus Vegeta, the general interactions between these two characters in this fight is absolutely great. I like that they gave Thor more Shakespearean dialogue in this fight. Nick coming back to voice Vegeta is also nice. I will say the dialogue is a little weak just because it's mostly abridged in MCU references, but to give it credit, it's not that distracting or annoying as other fights, which we will get to. But the main reason I like it is for the physical fighting of these two. Yes, for most of the fight, Thor really doesn't do much other than counter what Vegeta does, but to be fair, it is perfectly in line with Vegeta to go all out on someone like Thor and then get his cheeks clapped at the end. Plus, the way they have Thor counter a lot of Vegeta's abilities are actually quite nice. Thor using Mjolnir to dissolve the Big Bang attack is cool. I like when he throws Mjolnir at Vegeta at the beginning of the fight, which is pretty cheeky for Thor to do. I like when later in the fight Thor tries to throw his hammer at him again, only for Vegeta to stop Mjolnir, and then he just fucking sinks to the bottom because he's not worthy to wield it. Vegeta using a close range Hakai on him is awesome. I like the fact that he drags him across the mountain, and he uses a much more obscure ability that he has. And of course, Thor skipping Vegeta across the lake like he's a freaking rock is pretty funny too, but it leads up to one of the best moments in this entire fight, and what I consider one of the rawest moments in all of Death Battle. Thor tanking a point-blank final flash like a Chad. How is it this had a better fake-out death than Madara versus Aizen? We live in a society, folks. Top it off with a great vocal track, and you have what I consider a very solid episode. My only gripe with it is that I wish Thor did a little more in the fight, and I wish they covered more of his story, because Thor is one of the best characters in Marvel for a damn good reason. But other than that, this is a fantastic episode. S tier. Omniman versus Homelander. What a genuine surprise that we got this matchup this year. I figured it would take another year before we see Omniman or even an invincible character on the show. And to see Omniman here is just kind of wild. But then again, this was just free views waiting to happen, so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised of it happening so soon. But how is the episode itself? It's pretty alright. Not much to it debate-wise, but my god, that animation is solid. They even did a good job portraying their personalities. Homelander is much more cocky and arrogant, while Omniman is more cold and calculated. We even get a surprisingly gory moment at the beginning of the fight as the camera pans out to Debbie just barbecued alive. It's a really, really good start to the fight. The rest of the fight though, I On one hand, I do like the stuff we got, but at the same time, though, it's really fucking short for a fight. I get it was hand drawn, but goddamn, you had a 3-minute track and you used like less than a minute for it. Granted, there are some good scenes and a lot of good ideas here. I like when Omniman uses public transportation as a weapon and it calls back to the boys when Homelander uses his heat vision to destroy it. I like it when he gets dragged across the sidewalk, and the death, despite being kind of is pretty brutal. I think a cooler concept would have been to have Homelander get his jaw shattered and still hit Omniman with his heat vision while it's broken, which to me feels like it would fit better. I also think with the sidewalk section, there should have been a lot more gore to it. Like, again, dragging him across the sidewalk where people are. Because despite what they said, there is barely any gore in this episode. The only bits of gore we get are at the beginning of the fight and with the death with Homelander. That's about it. But I still wouldn't say it's like, you know, the worst episode ever. I think generally speaking, it was just overhyped, while still having a lot of good moments to it, just not to the fullest potential it could have been. It is a very middle ground episode, which blatantly puts it, in my opinion, into B tier. Magneto vs. Tetsuo. Again, another banger-ass episode. Magneto vs. Tetsuo is a matchup I've wanted for years, and I'm so glad they did it. Firstly, the animation is fantastic. It's not exactly perfect, mind you. Again, there's a couple issues, but it's not bad, since the fact that they also get very creative with Magneto's powers. Yes, he gets rubble thrown at him, and of course, a building at one point during the fight, but you also have Magneto using Tetsuo's own metal arm against him, and Magneto turning his own blood into buzzsaws, which is a very cool moment. And probably one of the more raw moments in the fight is when Magneto uses his own Big Bang against him by balling it up and then firing it back at him like it's a Kamehameha. I also really liked a lot of the effects in the episode, and the hand-drawn stuff is also great. Add to this that Ego Death is probably one of the best tracks of the season, and it makes the animation just pop out a lot. And by far, one of my favorite parts of this episode is the analysis of both these characters. I cannot stress this enough when I say this is probably one of the best analysis we've ever gotten, period. This is Dio versus Alucard levels of good, in my opinion. And to top that off with a post-analysis that is directly from the gods himself. And his name is DJT. But yeah, there's really not much else to say about this episode. It's just really good. S tier. Hercules versus Sun Wukong. This is the most unique episode out of the entirety of this season. And this is by far one of the best episodes of the season. Can you sense a pattern here? Herc vs. Wukong does a good job covering both the original mythos these guys are based on and does a good job portraying these characters within the fight. In fact, I really like the analysis for both of these characters. I already knew a decent bit when it came to Hercules, but it was also really fun to learn about Chinese mythology and Wukong. And despite the sprites being puppet rigs, I don't have an issue with it, because in motion they look very smooth and well done. I love the scroll being the boundary to the fight itself, and then as it keeps going on, it gets more and more spread out as it goes, until it gets to the climax of the duel. I love the scene where they descend the mountain in the beginning of the fight, which looks really smooth again, and I really like the climax as much as most other people don't really like it. I think it's just cool to see the god forms of them fighting each other. I can really say no negatives about this episode because I can't find any. I guess you could say the narrator can be a bit obnoxious, but I see that more as a charming thing rather than obnoxious. Either way, another solid episode. S tier. Boba Fett versus Predator. As much as I would like to say that this episode is another banger-ass one that goes in S tier, this is not the case. It's definitely not bad as people say it is, but it's definitely not as good. The analysis for these guys is pretty alright. Again, nothing spectacular, and nothing I would say is, egregiously bad, which is exactly how I feel about the fight. The beginning of this fight is very rough. I wonder who animated this part. We'll get to Dido later, but obviously there's a lot of issues with this. It looks so janky and fucked for the most part, and most of the hits don't even have impact to them. Thankfully, the quality improves once the preview ends. Thank God. But honestly, there really isn't much else to this one. They do a little bit of a, tussle with the melee weapons and whatnot, but it's a bit weird when he just pulls the fucking staff out of nowhere. Man, that hit really should have came with a sound effect if you think about it. Anyway, then Boba gets his arm cut off, hides in a tree like a bitch, and then outfoxes the Predator. And then we get to probably what I consider the coolest part of the fight, but then also one of the most missed potential parts of the fight as well. The fact that we got a plasma scythe lightsaber duel in this episode is great, and I really like the fire backdrop, but I do think that the effects here look a bit weird. Not only that though, some of the camera work is super janky as well. Also, there's this one cringe liner from Boba, which feels really out of place.
You are one ugly motherfucker.
But it is cool when he uses the fire backdrop to hide from Predator and outfox him again. And despite the death being a bit of a bummer because, you know, funny explosion death, it's fitting for Predator, and I do like he goes out with a one-liner better than Ed did. But yeah, like I said, there's really nothing else to this episode. It's just kind of existing, and that's okay, honestly. It was a nice way to bring back Boba Fett, and it was a good way to bring Predator into the show. But that's about it, really. B tier. Alright, I know I'm probably going to get some comments on this, so I'll go ahead and rank Ryan vs. Excalibur. Cool idea, nice analysis. Everything else is mediocre as fuck. Ryan vs. Wolverine is just way better in every way. D tier. James Bond vs. John Wick. Now, originally when I first saw this episode, I was pretty harsh on it, criticism-wise. But after rewatching it a bunch of times, I could safely say it's pretty alright. The analysis for these guys is great. I love how they cover all of Bond's wacky gadgets and his stupidly ridiculous adventures, while they also count up John's body counts throughout the comics and movies. It just has a nice flow to it. Wish I could say this about 1/3 of the fight, because Jesus Christ. The beginning of this episode's fight is fucking atrocious. I'm not gonna say who animated it, but let's just be real here. We know who animated this section. Bond moved like he was a goddamn weeping angel in Doctor Who. I thought he was gonna walk up behind Wick and just snap his neck and it's a GG. Instead, we got a very piss poor and horribly animated fight scene that followed. And I really don't think I need to bring up the mouth movements on these characters. Good lord, dude. Fucking animate mouths at least properly. Thankfully, we go from an N64 game to a PlayStation 5 in the next shot here, which thank goodness it doesn't look like this for the rest of the fight, because now it looks nice and smooth. Probably because they took away the controls from Dido. But yeah, no, after this little scuffle, they decided to just turn the RTX filters on, and it's very obvious and quite jarring. But after this, we get a pretty alright fight. Again, it's not as good as most other 3D episodes, but I definitely would say it's pretty alright for what it is. I'm not a fan of it being mostly pen fighting, but after this, we get the scene with the Honda Civic shooting that Wick, and then we also get a cool-ass knife fight on top of that. Though it is a bit weird when the bullets from the car don't pierce John's armor, but when Bond shoots him once, it does. I'm assuming he has armor-piercing rounds, but it's whatever. It was also a nice way to reference the Bond intro, but then it's followed up with a mad death. It looks like Bond just whipped his final smash, being honest. Though to be fair, it is better than how Nathan died. And the track is very solid as well. But yeah, like I said, pretty alright episode. B tier. Black Adam vs. Apocalypse. Yes, just yes. This was my most wanted Marvel vs. DC fight for years, and oh boy, did it deliver. While most other fights had a fancy gimmick to them, this fight is literally as bare bones as you can get. It's just a bare knuckle fist fight between Egyptian gods themselves. In fact, this fight is so legendary that it dips in frame rate halfway through it. You have the scene of Black Adam flying over the city, which looks really good. Apocalypse standing over Black Adam, which looks raw. And probably the coolest moment in the episode is when Black Adam uses the Yellow Lantern ring to fight Apocalypse, and he summons a lightning tiger. Of course, the 3D background also looks fantastic. You know this is where that sponsor money went. And oh yeah, the banter goes hard as hell. I don't know why, but Apocalypse has some fire-ass bars in this episode. And then secondly, I really like the hand-drawn stuff in this episode as well. It looks very well done, and I like the death a lot. And despite me shitting on Fallen Gods, I have officially gaslit myself into liking it. Unironically, I think it's pretty decent. My only two gripes with this episode are the glass crack effect, which stays on after he stomps his head in, and the oh shit moment, which is really stupid. But that's about it. It's a solid episode. The fight turns my pee-pee into the Rock of Eternity, and the banter is straight up fire. S tier. SpongeBob vs. Aquaman. Wait, what do you mean I skipped an episode? No, it goes Black Adam vs. Apocalypse, then SpongeBob vs. Aquaman. There's no episode in between it. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh. Do I really have to talk about that episode? Fine. Trunks versus Silver. Yay! Look, you all know well enough I don't like this episode, in the slightest. And as much as I would love to beat the dead horse that is Trunks versus Silver, and talk about how much Silver is a mediocre character at best, being compared to that of one of the best characters in Dragon Ball, you're gonna be sorely disappointed because you're not getting that from me. In fact, I'm gonna keep it relatively simple and just focus on the animation, because if I focused on the analysis for this episode too, we'd be here for another hour. And besides, why point out the piss poor formatting of Trunks' analysis when the animation itself has more flaws than an EA launch title? Because this episode is a cringy, boring clusterfuck from beginning to end. First of all, in terms of animation, I hope you really like that preview, because that's basically the entire fucking fight. Yep, it's only Silver throwing shit at Trunks the entire time. That's it. Now, I would be fine with one person having one ability and then the other character having a couple other powers, but this is all Silver does the entire time. We don't even get to see him using it in a creative fashion. It's the same shit over and over again until he decides, alright, I'm gonna do something a little different. Babushka. Speaking of which, if Silver isn't throwing rocks like an ape, he's getting manhandled. Trunks this entire fight completely jobs on him until Silver decides he wants to win. And the banter in this fight is so fucking cringeworthy. I heard people say they thought that Silver's last "it's no use" was bone chilling. You know, when I think of something bone chilling in Death Battle, I think of Apocalypse's laugh at the end of his episode, Sauron vs. Lich King, or just True Form Darkseid. And to quote True Form Darkseid, this banter is pitiful. Because all the banter is within this episode is just abridged quotes and reused lines from past Death Battles. Kind of like how they reused the same effects from past episodes as well. I guess they blew their entire budget out on Black Adam vs. Apocalypse for that one, huh? And then we have the most retarded part of this episode. The death. If you know Dragon Ball Heroes, this death is just insulting. Man, it's almost as if they didn't actually do research, but rather skimmed through the original manga. Hey, wait a minute. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, this episode is basically just Madara vs. Aizen, aka the most overhyped, overpraised piece of shit. Though, unlike with Trunks vs. Silver, I can at least give a positive to Madara vs. Aizen. This episode, on the other hand, has nothing good going for it. The sad part is that this is only the tip of the great mighty poo-shaped iceberg that is Trunks vs. Silver. Let's just say everyone, including myself, took an L in some way, shape, or form. But for this list, I don't have an L to give, I have an F to give. F for fucking embarrassing. SpongeBob vs. Aquaman. We are back to the good episodes with this one. Well, kinda. It's a good episode, don't get me wrong, but I do think it has a lot of hiccups in it. Firstly, I do think that the fight itself is very good. I fucking loved the preview when it came out. That starting line, the SpongeBob references, the voice acting, the sprites, it was all so good. And it did pick up afterwards. I really like the fact that they used the cruise bubble in the animation. It's one of my favorite things that SpongeBob has, and it's a callback to one of the greatest SpongeBob platformers of all time. And then after this, we got a lot of goofy SpongeBob references. I like the Great Neptune portrait moment, the pencil versus Trident fight is cool, and the moment where SpongeBob sucks up the entire ocean is pretty humorous as well, along with the climax being pretty epic, hashtag Columbo Sweep. Topped it off with Ocean Man being a really good track too, and you think I would put this episode really high. However though, this episode has two very glaring issues that I can't gloss over. The fact that they treat it as a quote-unquote stomp fight, and the way they treat Super Friend Aquaman. I get that he's memed on for being completely useless, but my god man, the way they treat him in this episode is just honestly rubs me the wrong way. When a combatant comes on the show, I expect them to at least get some form of respect, one way or another, but good lord, they did not give him this at all. It honestly pisses me off as to how they treat him like complete shit in the episode, because in all honesty, he does have some decent stuff, but yet they treat it like it's a fucking joke in most cases. Not only that though, I don't like the fact that they treat this as, oh, it's a funny stomp matchup, so who cares? Because that literally applies to almost every episode of the show. Hell, that applies to 90% of season 8. It also annoys me too, the fact that halfway through the fight, they stop fighting, and he cries like a little bitch during it. Come on, man, really? That scene is so cringy to watch. And honestly, it just makes you feel bad for the dude. Thankfully, this leads into the rest of the fight, which does have SpongeBob confidence him up a bit. You know, give him a little dad talk. And then again, afterwards, we get a solid fight. It's just that the constant mocking of Aquaman is very frustrating, and the crying session takes up way way too much what should be sparring between the two characters. But to give credit where credit's due, I think the rest of the fighting throughout the episode is very solid, and I respect Liam for writing Aquaman a respectable death. I just wish they respected him in the post and pre-analysis. Like, come on, man, he already got turned into a burnt fish egg. At least give him some respect in that post-analysis. So despite me saying I really like this episode, and despite the fact that I like a lot about it, because of the handicaps in it, I cannot rank it in S tier. Instead, it'll go into solid A tier. Jason Voorhees versus Michael Myers. Jesus Christ. Going from funny Sponge Man to serial killer Jason Voorhees is such fucking whiplash. Oh, and real quick, if I hear one Joe victim joke in the comment sections, I will literally tie you to a bed and break your shins with a sledgehammer, because I'm fucking sick of hearing that joke. Now, despite what you hear about this episode and how most people don't really like it, I'm gonna be honest with you, I kinda like this episode. It's more of a hot take in my opinion, and a guilty pleasure mixed in too, because in my opinion, I really like this episode. Firstly, I really like the analysis for both characters. It was smooth transition-wise, and it felt like it covered all the bases for them. Not only that though, I like the formatting to this episode. I like the episode taking place at a campsite. It feels more akin to what they were trying to do with Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man, which Jason vs. Michael greatly improves on. And as much as I don't like Ringmaster and Jocelyn, they don't overstay their welcome here, thankfully. And the second thing I like is the fight, or at least whenever we see Jason and Michael fighting on screen. But this also leads into the biggest issue with the episode. There's barely any fighting in it. I get what they were going for it being like a crossover horror movie aesthetic, but they ended up focusing on what makes those movies bad in the first place. In the words of HK47, worthless meatbags. And I wouldn't have a problem with the whole victim thing if it didn't take up 90% of the animation. It's also extremely janky, which I don't have an issue with. In fact, that's what I wanted from this episode. But we're watching Alex run around the forest doing fuck all. And unfortunately, there's just some things Devil Artemis cannot fix. But once we do get to see fighting, it's pretty good. I like the callbacks to some of their most iconic kills. The Mama Shrine hallucination scene is neat. The kill is brutal and well done. And despite the execution, the two fighting over one lone survivor is a cool concept. So with that, I'm going to stick this with the other 3 matchups in B tier. Sauron versus Lich King. Raw. Like, just raw. I don't know how else to describe an episode other than it's fucking raw. This is not only the best 3D fight, but this is the best fight of the season. The fight itself covers pretty much all the bases you would want in a Sauron episode, and I love that. And of course, the same can be said with Lich King. I fucking love the clash between their powers though, because it's used to creative liberties here. Like, oh, Sauron gets covered in souls? No big deal, he just sets them on fire and possesses them. Lich King uses Chicago winter as an attack, Sauron counters with California drought. All leading up to a climax that I can only describe as Blizzard versus Amazon, who shit the bed worse when it came to these franchises. And worker safety. Another thing I really liked about this episode was the analysis for both the characters. I myself didn't know much about Lord of the Rings when I watched this episode, so it was cool to learn about Sauron and what he could do, since he's a severely under-researched character. And despite me having a life and actually touching grass, I can definitely say Lich King is one of the coolest World of Warcraft characters, which then gets topped off by some banger-ass banter and a track that goes harder than the Sauronite armor. It's easy to see why most people agree that this episode is the best of the season, and for once, I agree with those people. S tier. Deku versus Asta. You know, it says a lot when I like the Deku episode more than the Trunks episode. Well, I guess like is a very loose term I use here because in all honesty, I don't really care about this episode. I was too busy laughing my ass off at Tiki roasting the fuck out of Deku versus Gon in terms of why it's a bad matchup, and the fact that I got to see Deku die in the episode. Like, I don't know really what else to say about it. It's just Deku and Asta fighting each other. The only things I genuinely cared about were the "aren't swords supposed to be sharp" line and the kill, which I thought was pretty brutal, but then got even funnier when Liam said that he died after hitting Asta. AKA Asta was such a unit that his muscle mass just caused Deku to internally implode. I also thought it was pretty funny that they had Hercules show up as a nice little cameo. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about this episode. It's just really mediocre. Because I can't say much about this episode, I'm going to put this squarely into the Popeyes tier.
Got that from Popeyes. Do you want a bite of my chicken breast?
And lastly, Gogito versus Vegito, or what I like to refer to as Super Saiyan Blue Balls the episode, because yikes. I will say, Dragon Dance, pretty spicy. Honestly, I don't know how Brandon gets in touch with these people, but somehow he got the dude who did Bury the Light. He's the equivalency of a fucking drug dealer in the hood. The only difference is instead of selling crack concentrate, he gets in touch with VTubers. But other than that, this episode just sucks. The animation is just complete dirty bird ass. The only real thing I can say about this episode is the effects are good, but even then, that's just being generous. Everything else about it just completely sucks balls. The facial expressions look like complete ass throughout the fight. You can look at this back and forth and just see, wow, this looks like ass. I've seen better voicing come out of a PS1 model than Gogeta and Vegito in this episode. That isn't the only PS1 aspect to this episode. You also have the fighting, which,
Oh my goodness! Squidward!
I swear, anytime these guys clash, 90% of the time, it has no impact to it. It looks like they're just play fighting, and it looks so jarring. It's like, you know how Hulk and Broly just touched their dick fists together in Hulk vs. Broly? Yeah, imagine that, but this is just the entire animation. Though to be fair, that's a little mean towards Hulk vs. Broly, because at least they tried with that episode. Here, not so much, because somehow this episode has worse impact with its hits than Akuma vs. Shao Kahn, because at least I could tell who was hitting who during that fight. Here, I can't even tell what the hell's going on half the time. And then you have Snakeway Road, which looks awful, because it looks like it's green screened in over the fighting, and it has no depth to it at all. But the big reason I don't like this episode is because of how much of a nothing burger it is. When I heard they were comping it, I thought, okay, that's a little weird. I mean, they're already similar stat-wise, so I guess it's fine. But then again, when you comp them, you give them hero shit, and they basically have the same arsenal. And with them using heroes, you think they would go a little all out with it, you know, with some very interesting dynamic to it. But no, there's nothing interesting here at all. Heroes was only used as hype fuel for the episode, and that's a shame because there's a lot of cool things you can do with heroes. You can use Limit Breaker, you can use Berserk Key. Hell, you could have both of them use Ultra Ego and Ultra Instinct, since both of them would know that. But no, they literally just went with, you know, canon shit, which is fine, I guess, but at the same time, if you're gonna comp them, at least go all out with it. To me, this episode was a complete bag of nothing. It gave me no hype, it gave me no interest in the matchup, and it flat out just seems like a waste for Gogeta, which is very ironic because that's basically how most of the people felt about this episode. What a shame we're ending the season off with a whimper. D tier. And that is going to do it. So, final thoughts on this season. Overall, it's a very good season and a massive improvement from season 8. I think the biggest problem with the past 2 seasons of Death Battle is that there's been very much so an inconsistency in quality across all their episodes, and this is very prevalent in season 8 where we had very, very high highs but very low lows, and it was very much so a bumpy roller coaster ride. Season 9 is what I consider the most consistent season of Death Battle since season 6, in my opinion. Granted, I'm not saying it's perfect, but overall it is very solid in terms of content, and while I think it does pass season 8 overall in quality, it definitely does not surpass season 8 in terms of its peak episodes. I mean, to be fair, it is competing with the best Star Wars episode, the best Flash episode, the most unique finale we've ever gotten, and Dio vs. Alucard. That steep competition is not going to get topped for a while. But overall for season 9, very good job. I really hope that season X is about as the same, if not better than last season. But that is going to be all for now, so I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.